Is the ELAC RS500 Varro the subwoofer that finally fills the low-end gap in your home theater, or is it just another pricey box that will sit idle? Who will actually notice the difference, and who can safely skip it without feeling a missing beat? And, most importantly, does the price make sense for the everyday listener who isn't chasing a cinema-grade experience? Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I first started looking at a subwoofer for my second-floor apartment, the hesitation was real. The room is modest, about 250 square feet with hardwood floors that love to amplify thuds. I'd tried a couple of budget models, and they either rattled the walls or whispered when the movie got intense. The risk of overinvesting in a unit that either overpowers a small space or underdelivers is a genuine worry, especially when the price tag sits in the high three-figure range. That's why I dug into how the RS500 actually behaves once it's plugged in, connected, and asked to do its job. The first thing I noticed after unpacking the Varro is the sleek satin black finish. It's not just about looking good, the enclosure feels solid enough to keep the driver glued in place, which matters when you crank the bass during an action sequence. ELAC's HEX technology is marketed as a way to reduce distortion, and in practice, the low frequencies stay tight rather than turning mushy when you push the volume. In my living room, the bass from a 20-minute sci-fi marathon stayed deep without spilling over into the neighboring room, something my old 8-inch budget sub never managed. One of the biggest practical strengths is the built-in bass amplification. Because the amp is matched to the driver, you don't have to guess about external power requirements or add a separate amp rack. I simply connected the sub to my AV receiver via the standard RCA line level input, turned the unit on, and let the automatic room calibration do its thing. The RS500 listened to the room's acoustics and set a baseline that felt balanced from the first test tone. For a non-techie, that eliminates the need to fiddle with crossover knobs or phase switches, which is a common source of frustration for people who just want solid bass without a degree in audio engineering. The app control adds a layer of convenience that feels modern without being gimmicky. Through the ELAC app you can fine-tune the volume, adjust the low-pass filter, and even set a night mode limit. I used night mode while watching a drama late at night. The app lowered the sub's output just enough to keep the dialogue clear without waking the whole building. The ability to make these tweaks from your phone, rather than hunting for hidden knobs on the back panel, is a real time saver for anyone who moves furniture around or changes speaker layouts often. Now, let's talk about who should really consider this sub. If you have a dedicated home theater or a larger listening space, say a medium-sized living room or a basement media cave, the RS500 brings the kind of authority that lets you feel explosions, rumble, and musical kick drums without the bass sounding detached. It also shines for audiophiles who already own high-end main speakers. The sub's clean, articulate low-end complements detailed mid-range performance rather than masking it. In short, anyone who cares about an immersive, balanced soundstage and is willing to allocate a decent chunk of their budget to the low-frequency foundation will get their money's worth. On the flip side, if you live in a small studio apartment, have a very compact bookshelf system, or primarily listen to podcasts and vocal-centric music, you might be better off with a more modest unit. The RS500's power can be a bit much for tiny rooms. Its output, while impressive, can cause the floor to vibrate if you're not careful with placement. In my own case, I had to pull the sub a few inches away from the wall and angle it slightly to avoid a low-frequency boom that made the picture frames rattle. That extra setup step isn't a deal-breaker, but it's something to be aware of if you prefer a plug-and-play experience. A practical weakness that shows up after a few weeks is the lack of a dedicated wireless connectivity option. The RS500 relies on wired RCA or optical inputs, which means you still need a short cable run from your receiver or TV. For a system that touts smart features, some users might expect Bluetooth or Wi-Fi audio streaming. If you're building a minimalist setup with hidden wiring, you'll have to plan that cable path ahead of time. It's not a fatal flaw, but it does add a small layer of planning that more budget-friendly models sometimes skip by offering wireless options. Another subtle trade-off is the learning curve of the app's interface. While the app is powerful, the layout isn't entirely intuitive for first-time users. The Advanced tab hides useful settings like phase adjustment and subwoofer delay, and you have to scroll a bit to find them. I spent about 10 minutes watching a quick tutorial video to understand where those controls lived. Once